Well, isn't that a doozy? See that? That's where I think the problem is. Right there, in that port. Now, granted, I did kind of pick it up like that at one point, but come on. It's a little bit touchy. That being said, oh well. This suffices. Basically just want to do that to explain my lack of a mic here on Oddit duration for the time being. Technical difficulties, time difficulties. I don't want to go out and look to get that thing repaired at the moment. I might go buy a USB mic, but I don't really want one because I like, the XLR better. But yeah, what's up? Well, there's so many things to talk about. Like, I suppose the ascendancy of Linux. Apparently, Linux use has been steadily growing, and also it runs on a host of devices, which is really exciting because it's just a great system. And Microsoft and Apple, though time tested, are frankly not as good in many regards. I would say that one of the only downsides to using Linux is if you play games, because there's not that many games for Linux, though that's changing, especially now that in Steam you have got some Linuxy stuff going on with the Steam OS and the Linux being paired there. So go ahead and try out a Linux distro, I would say, if you want to play it safe. Do Linux Mint, provided that you have a not too outdated piece of hardware, because that operating system can tend to run a little bit sloppy, just like any new version of Windows would run a little bit sloppy on older hardware, because it's got a nice little windowing system in there called Cinnamon. Let's talk a little bit about some Linux concepts for people who might not be familiar with it at all. And these are very basic. So Linux is just a kernel, which is sort of the way that the computer is told to talk to itself and to the user. On top of that, there's the operating system. And on top of the operating system, there's usually a windowing thing. So in the Linux world, that goes like this. There's the Linux kernel with the GNU operating system, and then what you would have is something like Cinnamon or KDE or GNOME to be able to display a graphical user interface. Yep, that's pretty much what it is. Now, because I'm so new and I'm learning these concepts myself, and one of the reasons I'm making this video is to put these concepts out there, I'm going to go ahead and look up kernel. The kernel is a computer program that is the core of a computer's operating system with complete control over everything in the system. It is the first program loaded on startup. It handles the rest of startup as well as input-output requests for software, translating them to data processing instructions for the central processing unit. It handles memory and peripherals like keyboards, monitors, printers, and speakers. I was correct. And so, there you go. A brief little primer on how Linux functions in that hierarchy to bring you a desktop environment. The cool thing about Linux is all of these distributions are free. And the code you can go ahead and play around with. So if you want to customize it at your own risk, you can certainly do so. dog's making weird sounds. You know when dogs go when they scratch themselves. Oh yeah. I see colors in the night, shining brightly in the sky. Falling stars light my path. I swear I will never die. The sea is breaking beneath my bow, black as pitch, and I somehow must navigate this foaming mess as drink and ration grow less and less. So what's life all about? I don't really know, but one of the things is obviously exploration, which is why I made that little lyrical piece over this stupid happy-go-lucky chord progression of G, E minor, C, and D major. So, I guess the two things about life are staying alive and finding out what's going on, which is what that song was about. And I think that that's kind of like the point of music as well, or of any of the arts, is to have a systemized way. You see how nice and mathematical all of that is there, with the ratios, the spaces between the intervals, the thicknesses of the strings, how these pegs have them tuned to a certain tautness, so they produce a certain sound like an E. And with that you can just do cool things like there's a lot of E's in that. That is a Bach prelude in E. So E, yeah. Anyhow, that's all just very neat, because you can make it very mathematical like Bach did there, or you can just be a hippie and go. Just a different way of bringing context by exploring the world, in this case the world being the fretboard of a guitar. As you can tell, this video is very experimental, and it's just me kind of throwing concepts out there. I would love to hear some feedback on the style of this video. Hopefully it'll get a little bit more succinct and better, but in the meantime, thanks for joining me, and have a great time wherever time happens to find you. That's also, I think, a really good and important thing, not to be too uptight and not to want to always put out the perfect thing, but to keep a flow going and at the same time improve as much as you can. So create, produce, improve, but don't be so bogged down with making a finished and improved and tweaked product that you never release anything, depending on what you're doing. Like if you're making pacemakers, make sure it works pretty damn well before you put it out there. But if you're making YouTube or you're an artist, don't lose steam by being a perfectionist. It's just not very fun for you or for the people that are looking for content. Cheers.